Hello, everybody. Just wanted to pick up on part two of this civil rights lecture and also focus on our social movements and linked up to our discussion of Kelly Lighter Hernandez and Steve Buttigieg's papers on dehumanization and thinking about the Prejudice and Pride documentary, how on that movement and where that emerges from and from this historical context. So the infamous Scott v. Sanford case that you read was to show how African Americans, as reading the words of Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution. And if we recall, the 1790 Naturalization Act sets the template, the ground for U.S. citizenship as it is being contested today in 2020, but also in this very moment sets African Americans outside of the bounds of law's protections. And ultimately, this fast tracks, and here you have this link that you can watch to really see how the this this ruling fast tracks the road to the Civil War, which emerges in 1861. Um, and the culmination of that, we know, were the bloodiest battles that were waged on this territory. We have these constitutional amendments known as the Civil War Amendments, the 13th, 14th, 15th, 13th, eliminate slavery. But as we know, and we've studied, has that big exception, except as punishment for a crime. And this is where today prison abolitionists in the present are really focusing on this as and illustrating how this serves the interests of capital and the incarceration of over 2 million people in the United States. The 14th Amendment, due process being one of the key aspects of the law, and the 15th Amendment, the right to vote. But we know during this period, which emerges in Reconstruction up until roughly about 1877, that right was really repressed. And this is why what is something that re-emerges during the 1960s and the move to the 1965 Voting Rights Act. You read about the Black Codes, and I'm going to move to the system that emerges after the Civil War, and specifically convict leasing. How does the slaveocracy begin to utilize the laborers to continue to do work? So the prison becomes a system in order to capture the laborers in order to have produce either free or very low wage labor there. And exclusion at the polls. This was another way that African Americans after slavery were denied their freedom, right? That you read about. And then Plessy v. Ferguson becomes the ruling that sets down Jim Crow. And you can watch this link here. And so American apartheid, separation by race, separate but equal, becomes the law of the land in the 1896 Plessy v. Ferguson ruling. And these now you begin, this deals with the rail car, but now separation by race begins to emerge in every aspect of public life. And I wanted to point out the inkwell here. This is in memorial to my neck of the woods down in Los Angeles near Venice, Santa Monica, where even the beaches were segregated. And this was a plaque that goes up. So if you were down near the Santa Monica Pier, you can go visit this site that was, as noted here, a place of celebration and pain. In the Mendez v. Westminster case that you've watched the link of Sylvia Mendez moving to desegregate the Mexican schools, that sets the ground for the Brown v. Board of 1954 of Topeka, Kansas in 1954, which ends segregation in public education. The Hernandez v. Texas 1954 case, which now, and the movie A Class Apart, which we were to watch before our last exam. But the idea of Mexican Americans being excluded from jury pools comes to an end also in 1954. So we begin to see the erosion of de jure discrimination by law being struggled over. And then civil disobedience becomes a key in changing unjust laws. Remember, civil disobedience is the act of intentionally breaking a law in order to highlight how unjust it is. And here you have in the sit-ins in Greensboro, North Carolina, where African Americans were denied the right to have a milkshake or sit at the lunch counter, and they began to do the opposite, having sit-ins along with their white allies. And here you see some of the violences that they faced by society and the law. This culminates with the Civil Rights Act in 1964, where Congress took on the Interstate Commerce Clause that we found in early Supreme Court rulings in the Gibbons v. Ogden case of 1824. And now moving on to the discussion on affirmative action. So, and here I have the book cover of political scientist Ira Katznelson, who really took a look at this concept of affirmative action during the early 20th century, specifically with the age of the New Deal, right? How governmental programs that privileged a particular race, and they're, white Americans. So you read about some of the recent cases and this notion of U.S. citizenship on equality. One of the things that this chapter mentions, focuses on all these categories listed here of difference. How do they play a role in structuring ideas and practices of equality or equal treatment before the law? Moving to the social movements, where folks had to struggle during the Chicano. You saw the Prejudice and Pride video from Latino Americans. This is another, you see the image here of Chicano. This was another documentary series, The History of the Mexican American Civil Rights Movement. And a lot of the literature, as we mentioned, I keep mentioning, the focus was on Mexican Americans initially because they served as they are not only the largest group in the United States, but they were also the initial inhabitants who were incorporated via the Second Conquest of Mexico in 1848 and solidified through their citizenship and entry into their citizenship via the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, right? But we know in practice that the practice has shown in their treatment they've been nothing above second-class citizens, right? In the eye of the dominant American forms of citizenship. We see these groups that begin to emerge. On the East Coast, you have the Boricuas and Puerto Rican movement, who are also integrated as what Ramon Grosfoguel calls racial colonial subjects. We see the Young Lords Party emerge, and you also got to see and hear from Oscar Lopez Rivera this semester, in his movement for independence in Puerto Rico. Cuban Americans, we see the move in the overthrow of the U.S.-backed dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista in 1959. Movements by Asian Americans against Chinese exclusion, California Indian Land Act. And this is a group that today is seeing a resurgence of hate crimes committed against them due to the pandemic that is occurring. The American Indian movement emerges during that civil rights period, challenging sets of laws and their second-class citizenship. And we see their resistance still occurring today in focusing like on the Dakota Access Pipeline and other spaces where they are trying to preserve their land and their resources. Women's rights have been a constant. Here in the bottom, you see a jailed Emma Tenayuca, who's a Mexicana in the early 20th century labor activist who fought and organized pecan workers in San Antonio and was a big activist. Emma Goldman on your right. And the LGBTQ movement emerges and fights for marriage equality. That was pretty recent, right? We're not even 5 years removed from that struggle. And age and disability These are movements that set in motion uh, opportunities for equality with these sets of laws that you see here. And so we will pause there as we think about how, with the words of Audre Lorde, that there's no such thing as a single issue struggle. We do not live single issue lives. We are all very multifaceted. We live and we exist. We embody multiple forms of difference. And those multiple forms of difference place us in a certain political vector outside in society. What we're trying to do here is to become conscious of those facts that we all embody and see how maybe the world is structured not in the most optimal way for us to move in, and how do we change those structures in order for us to become the most capable citizens, subjects that we can exist in.